I love the idea of design as a drug. Unlike you, Tassos, I haven't been able to break the habit, and I've been addicted to it for 30 years. Pretty much technical failure here. Sorry, just start that again. Okay, sorry, I've got a bit of a... Here we go. Okay. But more importantly, I've been addicted to a company called Designworks for 30 years. I've got some of my colleagues down over there. When I saw the speaker list, I kind of thought it was like the United Nations of design. So I thought I'd think about the subject or the theme, prosperity and design. I've got a technical failure, it fell off. So. That's fine. But I thought I'd put it through a New Zealand perspective and talk about what's happening in New Zealand and why. And the reason I'm keen to do that is I've had two conversations in the last week, both with Australians actually. One was, and excuse the language, but these are quotes, what's all this rubbish about a rock star economy in New Zealand? How the hell can you guys balance your books while we in Australia have a $30 billion deficit? Now, I don't think I can answer that question, but I would like to think that design had something to do with it. So way back when I was sort of thinking about what I was going to do for a living, sorry about this, guys. So I was thinking about this idea of how design works. It's relevant because it's the name of our business, I guess, and it's a nice name because it kind of describes what we do and what we believe in. Any luck? Sorry, guys, I'll have to wait for this slide. Great, we're away. So why is it important? So everyone knows what this is, right? No? It's the world's first digital camera, right? And it was designed by a company, developed by a company called Kodak. And it's probably, one of those staggering corporate failures, if you like, that has sort of been etched in the sort of legends of American corporate folklore. The strategic failure that led to Kodak's decade-long decline all started here. This is the guy who designed it, a guy called Stephen Sasson, and he writes about the experience he had when he presented the concept to the board and executive of Kodak. And he presented this wonderful idea, and there was silence. And then I think the chairman leant forward and said, well, Steve, that's a really cute idea, but for God's sake, don't tell anyone about it. So, the rest is history, I guess. Their failure to see or unwillingness to accept this new technology as something disruptive that was had massive potential in terms of generating prosperity. Their failure to see that led to their ultimate decline. They chose to protect, their legacy business rather than embrace the new. Now, thankfully, 30 years on, another Steve has helped us really understand how important design now is when it's embedded at the heart of a business and a business strategy. Luckily, many other businesses have learnt from Kodak's mistake as well. User-centered design is now kind of well established in the lexicon of business. Designers, kind of new rock stars. They've earned their seat at the table. Now design is in the boardrooms, and I think there's a very good reason for that, and I think we all know it. Organizations that embed design as part of their culture always outperform organizations that don't. So this is a slide you'll probably all be familiar with. The red line, companies that embed design. The blue line, companies that don't. So in New Zealand, I think, a lot of organizations have really embraced the whole concept of design and the role of design, and they very much are putting it to good use and are benefiting from it. I think, the proof of this is in New Zealand that they are actually still in business. And the companies that haven't embraced design are finding it increasingly difficult to survive. So clients like Methven, who we work with, have invested heavily in building their own internal capability, but obviously knowing how to partner incredibly well with external consultants as well. I think for me, Methven is a fantastic example of an organization that's really come to understand that it isn't defined by what it does, bathroom fixtures, or indeed the category that it's in, but it's defined by the value that it understands it brings to people's lives. And I think this sort of echoes the theme that's emerging today. I want to show you a little video the guys in our Auckland office produced to try and just illustrate this point, and hopefully this is going to work. So it's just lovely. It's Satin Jet, which is the product in that video. It's very, very cool. It's got, patented IP that atomizes the water without losing the temperature, the latent temperature in the water. And it's got great aesthetics as well. But the whole story is kind of about how it makes you feel. And I think, that goes to the heart of how we think about design, that impact and effect it has kind of on people's lives. So, most of our clients, a lot of our clients, we work very hard to understand that, they're about designing the experience, not just designing the product. I think the design schools in New Zealand are doing a marvelous job. This is a piece of work. Has anyone seen this before? This is a piece of student work. It's, I think, a beautiful example of this idea of loving the problem and coming up with an unlikely solution. So anyone who's had a broken arm here kind of knows, that irritating itch and the plastic bag in the shower. Well, all your problems are solved with this idea. It's in a prototype form, but effectively it's a process, an orthopedic process that identifies where a break is. A three-dimensional scan of the limb or the arm is taken, and then a 3D printed cast is generated out of a sort of solid latex product. So, I'd like to think if this was commercialized, it's a piece of student work, that it would be to orthopedics what digital has been to photography. So in New Zealand, it's no longer a debate about whether design is a good idea. We kind of all get that. The issue is how particularly export-focused companies employ it to become more successfully globally. I mean, we're a very small country, as far away from Silicon Valley as you can probably get, but the list of companies that are employing design is growing rapidly. So this is Formway, one of the trailblazers who have produced award-winning ergonomic office furniture. It is now the mainstay, the IP that this company has created is now the mainstay of Knoll Furniture, the US Knoll Furniture business. Fisher and Paykel, which I know Dean and Mark are going to talk about, just building, creating, designing beautiful, world-leading appliances. Air New Zealand, who we're working with, we help evolve and transform and reinvent what long-haul economy travel can be. Icebreaker, who have completely reimagined what merino wool can be as a sort of beautiful, comfortable outdoor adventure clothing. So these are all businesses that have sort of become, if you like, the role models for design in business in New Zealand. So there is still a debate though, and that's whether the sort of growth in the value of the IP that these companies are generating is growing at a sufficient rate to offset the decline in local manufacturing. So that's and I know it's probably a big debate in Australia as well, but it's kind of a moot point because it's just increasingly becoming unaffordable, unsustainable to manufacture locally. So Designworks, what have we been up to? We've been increasingly engaged with clients to really reimagine the future. So many of our clients are confronted by this incredible rate of change that's going on around them, brought on obviously by the digital and data revolution. But many of them are really struggling to understand how they move beyond where they are. Their current business model is expiring at a rapid rate. So for us, this is leading to work that's at its best transformative rather than incremental. So rather than redesigning the brand, we're actually now working to help redesign the business itself. So the demand for strategic design is growing, and it's growing virtually across every sector in the New Zealand market. And we've had a fascinating experience over the last 4 years where we're what I call a counter-cyclical business. So we have our busiest periods of growth and demand for our services during the toughest economic times. And it's kind of counterintuitive, but the reality is we work with companies who kind of recognize they can no longer communicate or advertise their way out of the problem. The problem is too fundamental and too deep. So we've doubled, I guess, in size, guys. Doubled in size in 4 years. So we've 5 offices, 130 people. We're still growing. We kind of feel like we've got the tiger by the tail at the moment. It's a little bit out of control, but we're loving it. We're loving it. So the challenges that we are being given, obviously demand a very sort of user-centered approach to design, but increasingly we're not just designing to solve the customer experience, we're actually designing to solve the underlying business problem. So it's applying design and design thinking in a completely sort of non-aesthetic way now. The reason we're doing that is because we can't tell clients to trust us, we're designers anymore. We have to validate the work we do. We have to take a creative hypothesis. We have to build a very robust business model around it. We have to provide the sort of economic modeling to safeguard and justify the client's investment, particularly when we're looking at significant investment. So, we've learnt from the IDEOs and the frog designs, thank you very much. We've stolen with pride, and we've learnt to adapt to our own sort of agile and iterative design approach. So that whole lean methodology of, ideating, creating, testing, using the consumer as the designer in the whole process, in a very rapid cycle of development is very much how we're operating now. It's also changed the way we work, and there's a few of my esteemed colleagues, but it's true. I mean, there's never been a great piece of work come out of Designworks which has been produced by an individual. It's always this alchemy of logic and magic working together in a fascinating way. It's meant we've invested very heavily in new talent, growing more broadly and more deeply our capability, and increasingly we're hiring from outside the design industry. It's also meant, I need some of that chewing gum. It's also meant that we're removing the client-agency divide. So the subject that came up before in terms of how it works between agency and client. So our solution is kind of to remove it. So we embed ourselves in our client's world, and we invite our clients to come and work inside our world. And it seems to work incredibly well. So you create this co-creation process that just accelerates the design processes at great speed. So clients like Air New Zealand, you've probably all seen the work they've been doing, using design to really reshape that experience for travellers. I mean, this is a process that's been going underway for 10 years at Air New Zealand, and it's really reshaped their reputation as one of sort of the most loved and, I guess, awarded airlines in the world. And at the heart of it was the need to transform. 10 years ago, Ansett collapsed. They were bankrupt, so they had to really chart a completely new course. So over that time, we felt them sort of look at the pain points. I think that's always a great place to start. What's the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the biggest problem we can solve first? So queuing in airlines, turning it into one of the world's first, if not the world's first, express check-in experiences, which really just changes the whole experience and dynamic of check-in. And interestingly, when the rest of the world's airlines are looking to innovate in business class and first class, Air New Zealand chose to innovate in economy. So, that pivot strategy has worked really well for them. So, being able to sort of turn the agony of Cuddle Class into the sort of joy of Cuddle Class, or what's been called Cuddle Class, is one of the great highlights of the work that we've been collaborating with Air New Zealand on. Rob Oram is a New Zealand economist. He said, Air New Zealand will generate more revenue, more prosperity, from licensing the IP to that product to non-competing airlines than it will make actually selling tickets on its own airline. So you see, this business has moved from being an airline to being a design business, actually leading innovation within the category, opening up new revenue streams from the IP, from the design. Another client of ours, we mentioned postal services in rapid decline, New Zealand Post facing their own Kodak moment. Interesting business, a declining postal business, but they started up a bank 10 years ago. So they've got this declining business and this sort of little upstart business on the rise. So very interesting. So we've worked with them over the last 3 years to kind of try and sort that problem out. Very, very, very complex interrelationship of business, sustainability, social issues in terms of access, all of those other things. But effectively what we did is we took a pretty tired, unsustainable, poor experience, and we effectively turned the post shop into a bank, a full-service bank, where it just happens to be easy to send stuff as well. So now if we'd told the client that's what we were going to do 3 years ago, we would have been thrown out of the room. Yeah? But here we are 3 years later, and it's a complete reversal of the business model. And finally, Silver Fern Farms, a client that's very dear to our heart, and Sharon, our client, is here with us today. A business that was a very traditional meat processing business, a sector, very challenged by sort of the economics of the global economy, global commodity prices. And we've helped them really transform from that primary producer or processor to really a global marketer that's much more focused on product innovation and developing new export markets for its product. So thank you, Sharon, for all your support. So what is it about design in New Zealand? Why is it so important, I guess? And, we've been very lucky because we've had the New Zealand government consecutive New Zealand governments who have invested heavily in design education, design enablement. So I think, the politicians actually get a big tick for that. It's been, instrumental in changing the way business see design and start to embed that capability within their business. It's really important to New Zealand because we don't have these, You guys are sitting on this incredible resource, natural resource of exploitable minerals that you can generate, over 50% of your export earnings, 140 billion contributed to the local economy. We don't kind of have that in New Zealand. We have some very nice scenery, which admittedly attracts tourists to New Zealand. We have very unique flora and fauna, which actually has been quite useful for the film industry recently. But mostly we have these. We have a lot of these, yeah, who eat this. And we get a lot of that because it rains a lot in New Zealand. But it produces this. We call it our white gold. You've got the real gold, we've got the white gold. But, you know, in reality, New Zealand lacks that sort of, it's a very small country geographically. It lacks that abundance of resources that Australia is so well endowed with. But I think, you know, my provocation is perhaps that's worked to our advantage because we haven't had those resources. So we've come to understand that our future prosperity as a nation, a very small nation, you know, at the very edge of the world, you know, our future prosperity demands that we focus our energies on turning that sort of natural advantage that we have into sort of higher value products and services that we can offer the world. It's meant tapping into the emerging category trends and consumer demand, and then really focusing on developing very narrow niche products that we can demand a premium for. It means also building brands that tell a much more evocative story of place, provenance, to create a much richer sense of value. So I think, you know, as a country, there's a new confidence that's emerging. We've recognised that there's this little kind of DNA in the New Zealand character, which is about this ingenious and resourcefulness. And we've realised we have to turn that into our competitive advantage. As a nation, we've become a hell of a lot more comfortable and a lot more confident in what it means to be a Kiwi. And I think we've become far less afraid of actually showing it. And more recently, the work we've been doing is helping to project a much stronger sense of the national identity, our unique identity to the world. So I guess I'm here to say we're more than just a pretty face. This is a 100% pure campaign. You know, we've got a much more maturing appreciation of what our value proposition is beyond this beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, this 100% pure unquestionably has been an incredibly powerful tourism campaign, but it has an inherent liability to us if we treat it as our national brand. And we learnt that recently with a food scare issue we had in New Zealand, and this became target number one in terms of the authenticity of this claim. But it's a tourism campaign. It's not the whole story. So more recently, we've been working on developing with the government to develop a much deeper narrative that brings forward that sort of new New Zealand story. So it's a fairly significant government initiative that is just in its starting blocks, but it's a story that's much more about kind of who we are and how we do things as where we're from. So the open places that we all know, but open minds and open hearts is a key part of the narrative now that we're going to bring forward. So it's not an advertising campaign. It's this shared narrative and toolkit, I guess, available in the sort of the digital world that all companies and all government organisations can draw upon and use to help tell their story and create a much more consistent view of New Zealand. So I guess ultimately our goal is to create a story of a country that takes a fresh perspective and is doing things differently. It might not always turn out the way we want it in the case of this recent race, but you know, we'll give it our best shot. We'll give it our best shot. So ultimately, it's a story of a country that, unlike Kodak is actually open to the new. And I think I'm probably out of time by now. You can go online and see all of the content at story.newzealand.com, I think is the website address. So it's a lovely 3-minute video that'll help sort of flesh that out. But that's my presentation. That's New Zealand design.